The ocean began to glow beneath us with a pale green light. Our compass spun without stopping. The air tasted of metal and burning stone. When the serpent rose, its body stretched farther than we could see through the ash. It breathed the poison air like food. I still remember the way ash coated my tongue that cursed summer in 1783, and the darkness that fell at noon. We were fishing off Iceland's southern coast when the mountains began to bleed fire and the sea turned against us. The fissure had opened in early June on the mainland, a crack in the earth that ran for 15 miles across the Laki region. We did not see it happen. We lived on Heimaey, the largest of the Westman Islands, 6 miles south of the coast. The island was no more than 2 miles across at its widest point, a piece of volcanic rock rising from the North Atlantic, with steep cliffs on 3 sides and a small harbor on the 4th. 300 souls lived there, most of us fishermen or farmers scratching what we could from the thin soil. We learned of the eruption when the sky turned gray and stayed gray. Then the ash began to fall. At first, it came as a fine dust that settled on rooftops and coated the stones. Within days, it fell heavier, in flakes like snow, but gritty and sharp. It accumulated in drifts against the walls of houses. It turned the streams milky. It covered the grass in the pastures until the green disappeared entirely beneath a blanket of gray. I was 24 years old that summer and worked with my father's fishing crew. We had a small boat built from driftwood and salvaged planks, tarred at the seams and fitted with a square sail that caught the wind when the wind came. The hull measured 18 feet from stem to stern and sat low in the water when loaded. We kept it pulled up on the shingle beach below the village when not in use, turned upside down to keep rain from collecting in the bottom. The wood was old and split in places, but we packed the gaps with wool soaked in tar, and it held. There were 6 of us. My father, Jan, who had fished these waters since he was a boy and knew every rock and current between the islands and the mainland. His hands were scarred from decades of hauling nets, and his back had a permanent stoop from years of rowing. He spoke little and worked steady. My uncle Einar, my mother's brother, broad in the shoulders and missing 3 fingers on his left hand from a net accident when he was young. The stumps had healed clean, but the hand never closed properly again. He wore a leather strap around the palm to help grip the oars. Bjarni, a quiet man who kept his own counsel and carved bone hooks during the evenings when the work was done. He was a widower, with no children, and lived alone in a small turf house near the church. Gunnar, young and eager, only 19, always the first to laugh and the last to complain. He had joined our crew 2 years prior and showed promise. Pal, the oldest among us, with a white beard that reached his chest and eyes that could read weather before it arrived. He had sailed to Norway in his youth and knew the old stories better than anyone in the village. And myself. We fished for cod and haddock in the waters between the islands and the mainland. The fish came in thick schools during summer months when the water warmed and the currents shifted. We used nets woven from horsehair and weighted with stones, each net 30 feet long and 6 feet deep. We set them in the evening and pulled them at dawn. The work required all 6 of us. 2 men to the oars, 2 to pay out the net, 2 to watch for rocks and current. When we pulled the nets, we formed a line and hauled together, hand over hand, until the catch came aboard in a silver mass of thrashing bodies. We filled our hold with cod and brought them to shore where the women gutted them and laid them on wooden racks to dry in the wind. The drying racks stood in rows above the harbor, hundreds of split fish hanging like laundry. In good years, we filled those racks 3 times over before summer ended. The dried fish kept through winter, and we traded what we did not eat for grain and wool from the mainland. The work was hard and the pay small, but it was steady, and it kept hunger from the door. Every family on the island relied on those racks. Without the fish, we had nothing. When the ash started falling, we thought it would pass in a day or two. Iceland had volcanoes. The island itself was born from volcanic fire, and the mainland erupted every few decades. We were accustomed to the smell of sulfur from the hot springs and the occasional tremor that rattled the dishes. Eruptions came and went. They might destroy a farm or two, but they always quieted. Life continued, but this eruption did not quiet. The ash fell heavier each day. It covered the grass in the fields and turned the water in the streams gray. The sheep began to die first. They grazed on the ash-covered grass, and the grit wore down their teeth to the gums. Their mouths bled when they tried to eat. Within 2 weeks, half the flock was dead or dying. Then the cattle followed. They ate less than the sheep, but the ash damaged them the same way. Their teeth ground down, and their stomachs filled with the volcanic dust. They grew thin and weak and died with food in their bellies that they could not digest. The sky remained dark even at midday. The sun appeared as a dim red circle behind the smoke, like a forge ember seen through dirty glass. It gave no warmth. The air temperature dropped despite it being summer. We wore wool shirts and coats when we worked outside. The air smelled of sulfur and burning rock, a sharp chemical odor that caught in the throat and made the eyes water. It burned the lungs to breathe deeply. We tied cloth over our mouths and noses when we worked outside, but the ash found its way in. It settled in the folds of fabric and worked through with each breath. It coated the tongue and left a taste like metal and rot that no amount of water could wash away. By the 3rd week of June, half the island's livestock was dead. The fields were buried under ash. The handful of crops we grew would not survive. We had only the sea left to us. If we could not fish, we would starve by winter. So we went out. The first trips were normal enough. The ash fell on the water and turned the surface gray, but beneath it the fish still swam. We hauled our nets and brought in cod. We worked quickly and returned to shore before the visibility dropped too low. At night, we cleaned the catch and packed it in salt. The ash got into everything. It mixed with the salt and turned it gray. We picked it out as best we could. On the morning of June 23rd, we pushed off before dawn. The air was cooler on the water, and the ash fell thinner. We rowed south toward the deeper banks where the larger fish gathered. Paul sat in the stern and watched the sky. He did not speak, but his jaw was set in a way I had come to recognize as unease. The water that morning was calm. No wind. The surface lay flat and dark, broken only by the slow drift of ash. We set our nets and waited. The sun rose behind the smoke and gave no warmth. The ash continued to fall. It landed on our shoulders and hats and coated the deck in a fine gray layer. Bjarni swept it overboard with a brush, but more fell to replace it. When we pulled the nets, they came up light. Only a few fish. Most were dead, their eyes clouded, their mouths open. We threw them back. Gunnar joked that the fish had more sense than we did and had swum to cleaner waters. No one laughed. We moved farther south, away from the main island. The water deepened. The color changed from gray-green to black. Paul told us to stop. He pointed at the compass. The needle spun slowly in the box, drifting without settling. My father tapped the glass. The needle continued to turn. "We have current," Einar said. "The compass always drifts in strong current." Pal shook his head. The water is still. Look. He was right. The surface showed no movement, no ripple, no pull, yet the compass needle turned. We should return, Pal said. My father looked at the empty hold, and then at the sky. If we return now, we will have nothing to show. We try once more. We set the nets again. The air grew warmer as we worked, though the sun remained hidden. Sweat ran down my back despite the lack of direct heat. The sulfur smell grew stronger. It made my eyes water and my throat tighten. Gunnar coughed and spat over the side. The water began to change. Small bubbles rose to the surface in clusters. They broke and released a faint hiss. The smell intensified. My father ordered us to pull the nets early. We hauled them in fast. They came up fouled with black sediment that stank of rotten eggs. No fish. Only the sediment and scraps of something that looked like burned kelp. As we coiled the nets, the bubbles increased. They spread across the surface in a widening circle around the boat. The hissing grew louder. Then the water beneath us began to glow. It started faint, a pale green light deep below. It spread outward like oil on water, pulsing in slow waves. The light grew brighter. I could see down into the water farther than should have been possible. The depth beneath us was immense. The light showed no bottom, only a vast empty column of water descending into blackness. And in that blackness, something moved. Paul grabbed the oars. He did not speak. He simply began to row. Einar joined him without question. The rest of us stared into the water. The shape below rose slowly. It was too large to comprehend at first. I thought it was a current or a trick of the light. But it rose steady and deliberate, and the glow brightened around it. "Row," my father said. His voice was quiet but sharp. We row now. We grabbed the remaining oars and pulled. The boat turned toward the island. The water behind us erupted in a column of steam. The heat struck our backs. Gunnar cried out and dropped his oar. The wood of the handle was too hot to hold. I wrapped my hands in my shirt and kept pulling. The glow beneath us spread. The thing below was rising faster now. I could see the shape of it. Long, segmented. The body moved in slow undulations, each segment the width of a house. The scales caught the green light and reflected it in patterns that hurt to look at. The head was still too deep to see clearly, but I saw the ridge of its spine and the width of its body, and I knew we could not outrun it. The surface broke ahead of the boat. Not the head. A section of the body, rising in a smooth arc that displaced enough water to rock us hard to port. The section hung in the air for a moment, water streaming from the scales, steam rising from the skin. Then it slid back beneath the surface with barely a splash. Another section rose to starboard, then another behind us. We were surrounded by the coils. The creature was circling the boat without showing its head. Each time a section surfaced, the green glow brightened. The air above the water shimmered with heat. My father stopped rowing. There was no point. The creature had us. He set down his oar and gripped the side of the boat. The rest of us did the same. We waited. The head rose in front of us. It came up slow, lifting from the depths with the same deliberate calm as the rest of the body. No thrashing, no sudden burst, only a steady, inexorable rise that pushed water aside in smooth swells. The skull emerged first, narrow and elongated, longer than our boat from stem to stern. Water streamed from the scales and fell back into the sea in heavy sheets. Steam rose where the water touched the skin. The jaw hung slightly open, revealing the interior of the mouth. Rows of teeth lined both the upper and lower jaws, set back from the lip edges like a fish rather than a predator. But these teeth were not the small needle points of a cod or haddock. They were curved backward, each the length of my forearm, yellowed with age and scored with grooves from use. They were designed for gripping rather than tearing. Once something entered that mouth, it would not escape. The eyes were set far back on the skull, positioned to the sides rather than forward. They were covered by a milky film that made them appear blind. No pupil showed through the haze. The eyes did not move to track us. They stared ahead without focus. I do not think the creature saw us with those eyes. It sensed us some other way. Perhaps through vibration in the water. Perhaps through the heat of our bodies. Perhaps through some sense we do not possess and cannot name. The nostrils were wide slits near the top of the snout, positioned where they could draw air without the head needing to fully surface. They opened and closed in a slow, steady rhythm, expanding with each inhale and contracting with each exhale. Each breath produced a low whistling sound that carried across the water, a hollow note like wind through a cave mouth. Steam rose from the nostrils with each exhale and drifted around the head like fog. The steam smelled of sulfur and something else, something organic and rotten like the bottom of a tide pool exposed to the sun. The skin was not smooth as I had expected. It was covered in overlapping scales, each the size of a dinner plate, each edged in a darker shade than its center. The scales were a deep gray-green, the color of old bronze left to weather. They did not shine. They had a matte finish, scarred and pitted from what must have been centuries of life. Deep gouges crossed the jaw and throat, some old and healed, others more recent and still raw at the edges. Barnacles grew in clusters along the lower jaw and down the neck, thick incrustations that the creature had made no effort to remove. Old harpoon wounds marked the throat and shoulders, long healed but visible as pale ridges where the scales had grown back differently. The creature breathed. It did not snap at us. It did not thrash. It simply hung in the water with its head above the surface and breathed the sulfur air. The jaw moved slightly with each breath, opening a fraction wider with the inhale and closing with the exhale. The teeth clicked together softly, a sound like stones tapping in a leather bag. The green glow came from within its body, visible between the scales like firelight through cracks in a furnace door. The light pulsed with each breath, brightening as it inhaled the poisoned air and dimming as it exhaled. The rhythm was slow and steady, perhaps one breath every 10 seconds. It gave the impression of great age and great patience. The neck extended down from the head in a smooth column, disappearing beneath the surface after 15 feet. I could see the shape of it continuing down, visible through the green glow, descending into depths I could not measure. The body behind the neck was segmented, each segment slightly wider than the last, giving the whole form the appearance of a massive serpent rather than a fish. The segments moved independently, flexing and contracting in slow waves that traveled the length of the body. We sat frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. The boat rocked gently in the wake of the creature's surfacing, the hull creaking with each small shift. The ash continued to fall, landing on the serpent's head and melting into steam before it could settle. The hissing of the melting ash joined the whistle of the creature's breath, creating a sound like a distant waterfall heard through fog. Gunner's hand gripped the gunwale so tightly, his knuckles showed white against the wood. Einar had stopped breathing entirely, his chest locked and his eyes fixed on the creature's mouth. Bjarni sat with his mouth open and his bone hook still clutched in one hand. Paul had closed his eyes and was whispering something under his breath that might have been a prayer, or might have been a counting of breaths. My father kept his eyes on the creature. He did not look away. He did not blink. His hands rested on his knees and did not shake. He watched the way a man watches a dangerous dog, waiting to see if it would attack or turn away. His jaw worked slightly, grinding his teeth, but he made no sound. The creature took 3 more breaths, each one exactly like the last. Steady, measured, unhurried, then the nostrils closed, the jaw settled, the milky eyes remained fixed on nothing, and the creature began to sink. It went down as slowly as it had risen, the head disappearing first, then the long neck, then the coils surrounding us. The green glow faded, the water returned to black. The bubbles stopped, the surface smoothed. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Paul reached for his oar. "We should leave," he said. Now, we rowed. No one spoke. The island appeared ahead of us through the ash, a dark shape against a darker sky. We did not look back. When we reached the harbor, other boats were already pulled up on the shore. The men stood in groups and spoke in low voices. They had seen it too. Some had been farther out and watched it rise from a distance. Others had been close enough to smell the heat from its breath. No one had been taken. The creature had surfaced, breathed, and sank. It had not attacked. That night, the elders of the village gathered in the church. They spoke of the old stories, the serpents that lived in the deep and rose when the world was ending. Jörmungandr, the world serpent that circled the earth and bit its own tail. When it released its tail, the sagas said, Ragnarok would begin. The mountains would bleed fire. The sun would go dark. The sea would rise up. The mountains were bleeding fire. The sun was hidden. Some said the serpent had released its tail. But Paul, who was older than most and remembered stories from his grandfather, said the creature we saw was not Jörmungandr. It was one of the lesser serpents, the ones that lived in the volcanic vents beneath the ocean floor. They fed on the gases and heat from the Earth's core. When the eruptions began on land, the vents beneath the sea opened as well. The serpents rose to feed. I do not know if he was right. I only know what I saw. We did not fish the next day, or the day after. The other crews stayed in harbor as well, but by the 4th day, hunger forced us back out. The livestock was dead, the fields were ruined, we had only the sea. We went in groups this time, 4 boats together. We stayed close to the island and worked shallow water. We set nets and pulled them quickly. The catch was poor. The fish had fled or died, but we took what we could. For a week we saw nothing. The ash continued to fall. The sky remained dark. The sulfur smell never faded. But the serpent did not return. Then, on the morning of July 2nd, the ocean began to glow again. We were farther north this time, working the banks off the eastern shore of Himai. The water was shallow here, no more than 30 fathoms. When the glow appeared, it came from below and spread fast. Within moments, the entire area around our boats was lit with that pale green light. One of the other boats turned and made for shore immediately. We hesitated. My father looked at the empty nets and then at the light. He told us to pull anchor and row. We were halfway back when the serpent surfaced. It rose directly beneath one of the other boats. The boat lifted on the creature's back and tilted to the side. Men spilled into the water. The boat slid off and capsized. The serpent did not attack. It simply continued rising, oblivious to the men around it. Its body stretched up and up, impossibly long, each coil wider than the last. The head broke the surface 50 yards away. The men in the water swam toward the nearest boat. We rowed toward them. The serpent's head turned slowly, surveying the area. The milky eyes passed over us without focusing. The nostrils flared. It breathed the poisoned air in deep, shuddering draws. We pulled 2 men from the water. Another boat took 3 more. 1 man did not surface. We searched for him, but found nothing. The serpent remained still, its head hanging above the water, breathing. Then it began to sink. The head went under first. The coils followed. The glow faded. The man's body surfaced moments later, floating face down. We pulled him aboard. His chest was crushed, ribs broken inward. He had been caught between the boat and the serpent's back when it rose. We brought the body to shore. The village priest said words over him, and we buried him in the small cemetery on the hillside. The ash fell throughout the service, coating the grave before we could finish filling it. After that, fewer boats went out. Some families gave up and moved to the mainland, though the mainland was suffering worse than the islands. The ash there was deeper. The rivers ran thick with it. The fish in the rivers died. The grass died. The animals died. People began to die. We continued fishing because we had no choice. We worked closer to shore and returned quickly. We saw the glow 3 more times that month. Twice the serpent rose, breathed, and sank without incident. Once it did not fully surface, only circled beneath us, the light moving in slow patterns. By August, the eruption had continued for 2 months. The Laki fissure showed no sign of closing. The ash fell day and night. The sun was a memory. Crops across Iceland had failed. The famine began. In September, the serpent stopped rising. The glow appeared once or twice more, faint and distant, but the creature did not surface. Perhaps it had fed enough. Perhaps the vents beneath the ocean closed. Perhaps it simply returned to the depths it came from. The eruption continued until February of the following year. By then, 1/4 of Iceland's population had died from famine and disease. The livestock was nearly gone. The fields would take years to recover. The ash had poisoned everything, but the serpent did not rise again. At least, not in my lifetime. I am 71 now. I have not fished those waters in decades. The Laki eruption ended, but the scars remain. The island lost half its people to starvation and sickness in the years that followed. Paul died in 1785. My father in 1790. Gunnar moved to Denmark and never returned. Bjarni carved his bone hooks until his hands failed him. I keep one of those hooks still, wrapped in oiled cloth. Sometimes I take it out and try to convince myself the creature was only a trick of the poisoned air and exhaustion. I cannot. If this account from 1783 kept you on edge, please leave a like and help others discover these forgotten encounters. Subscribe to Dust and Bones for more historical horror stories from sailors, explorers, miners, and soldiers who faced the unknown. Drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. Next time, we journey deep into the Appalachian Mountains, where railroad workers broke through into something that should have stayed buried. Until then, stay curious and remember that history holds more than textbooks dare to print.